"Don't even think about coming to the engagement," my sister snapped. "I don't want your face ruining a single photo." That night, my dad texted me, "Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, you'd be worth inviting." I just smiled, canceled the venue they couldn't stop bragging about, and watched the dream engagement dissolve from the balcony of my apartment. I, 29M, never thought I'd be the type of person to orchestrate revenge, but sometimes life pushes you into corners you never imagined. The text from my sister came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was sitting in my office, reviewing the quarterly reports for the luxury event venue I'd been managing for the past 3 years. She told me not to even think about coming to her engagement party, claiming she didn't want my face ruining a single photo. The venom in her message was so casual, so effortless, like she'd been practicing those words for months. 20 minutes later, Dad's message arrived. He suggested that maybe if I wasn't so pathetic, I'd actually be worth inviting to family events. The words hit differently coming from him. My sister had always been dramatic, but Dad's cruelty felt surgical, precise. I set my phone down and stared out the window of my corner office. The venue below bustled with activity as my team prepared for an evening wedding. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light, casting rainbows across marble floors that had hosted countless celebrations. It was beautiful, successful, and entirely mine to control. That's when I remembered the booking. 3 months earlier, my sister had called me during one of our rare cordial moments. She'd been gushing about her engagement party, describing her vision in exhausting detail. She wanted something spectacular, something that would make all her friends jealous. The grand ballroom at the Metropolitan Club was perfect, she'd said, but they were booked solid for the next year. She'd asked if I could pull some strings. I'd made some calls, used my industry connections, and secured her the impossible booking. The Metropolitan Club's grand ballroom, complete with the rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline. The deposit alone was $15,000, which she'd put on her credit card without blinking. She'd been so grateful then, practically singing my praises to anyone who would listen about her amazing brother who could make miracles happen. I pulled up the booking in my system. The party was scheduled for the Saturday night. 150 guests, premium bar package, 3-course dinner, live jazz quartet. The total bill was going to be close to $40,000. My sister had spent the last 3 months sending me updates about every detail, from the specific shade of gold for the linens to the imported flowers she'd ordered from some exclusive florist in the city. My finger hovered over the cancel button. The ethical part of my brain tried to intervene, reminding me that this would hurt more than just my sister. Her fiancé seemed decent enough, though I barely knew him. Their friends had likely made plans, bought gifts, arranged babysitters. But the anger burning in my chest overwhelmed any sense of moral obligation. I clicked cancel. The system prompted me to confirm. I clicked yes. A notification appeared asking for the reason. I selected client request from the drop-down menu and added a note about a family emergency requiring immediate cancellation. The system processed the request, and just like that, 3 months of planning vanished. The Metropolitan Club's policy was clear. Cancellations made less than 72 hours before the event resulted in forfeiture of the entire deposit, plus a penalty fee of 20% of the total booking cost. My sister was about to lose over $23,000. I leaned back in my chair and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine happiness. The first call came at 4:15 p.m. My sister's number flashed on my screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times in the next hour. I ignored them all. By evening, the messages started pouring in. My sister was hysterical, demanding to know what had happened. The venue had called her to confirm the cancellation, citing the family emergency I'd referenced. She'd tried calling the club directly, but they'd explained that all communications had to go through the booking agent, me. Dad called next. His message was shorter but angrier. He wanted to know what kind of game I was playing and demanded I fix whatever I'd done immediately. I poured myself a glass of wine and read through every single message without responding to any of them. Each one felt like validation. For years, I'd been the family disappointment. The younger brother who'd chosen a career in hospitality instead of law like Dad, or finance like my sister. I was the one who'd never married, never bought a house in the right neighborhood, never produced grandchildren for family photos. They'd made it clear over countless family dinners that I was acceptable to have around when they needed something, but not significant enough to include when it actually mattered. My sister's engagement party was apparently one of those times that mattered. Wednesday morning brought a new development. My sister showed up at my office. She stormed past my assistant, her face flushed with anger and desperation. She demanded to know why I'd canceled her party and insisted there had to be some mistake. I told her there was no mistake, that I'd simply honored her request. When she looked confused, I explained that since she'd made it clear I wasn't welcome at her engagement party, I'd assumed she no longer needed the venue I'd secured for her. The confusion in her eyes shifted to panic. She started backtracking, claiming she'd been stressed and hadn't meant what she'd said. She insisted I was still family, and of course I was invited. Her voice cracked as she begged me to fix this. I told her I'd look into it, but explained that the Metropolitan Club was very strict about their cancellation policy. I might be able to find her an alternative venue, but it wouldn't be anything like what she'd originally planned. She left my office in tears. Dad called that afternoon. His tone was different now, more measured. He suggested that maybe there had been a misunderstanding, that families should stick together regardless of little disagreements. He offered to take me to lunch to discuss the situation. I agreed to meet him. The restaurant was one of those expensive downtown places Dad frequented for business lunches. He'd already ordered by the time I arrived. He started with small talk, asking about work and commenting on how successful I seemed to be doing. The compliments felt hollow, obviously strategic. Eventually, he got to the point. He acknowledged that my sister could be dramatic and that maybe he'd been too harsh in his text. He suggested that family was more important than pride and asked what it would take to restore the venue booking. I told him it wasn't about money or apologies. I explained that the cancellation had made me realize something important about our family dynamic. I'd spent years being the reliable one, the one who fixed problems and made things happen behind the scenes, but I was never quite good enough to be included in the front row of their lives. Dad shifted uncomfortably. He insisted that wasn't true, that I was an important part of the family. But his words lacked conviction, and we both knew it. I left lunch without committing to anything. Thursday brought more desperation. My sister had apparently spent the previous day calling every venue in the city, trying to find somewhere that could accommodate 150 people on 3 days' notice. The few places that had availability were either completely unsuitable or charging emergency booking fees that would triple her budget. Her fiancé called me that afternoon. He was calmer than the rest of them, more diplomatic. He explained that he understood there was some family tension, but asked if there was any way to resolve this without destroying their engagement party. He offered to pay any additional fees or penalties required to reinstate the booking. I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. He seemed genuinely caught in the middle of a family drama he hadn't created. But my anger wasn't really about him, and his reasonable approach almost made it worse. It highlighted just how unreasonable the rest of my family had been. I told him I'd think about it. Friday morning, I made my decision. I called my sister and told her I'd found a solution. There was a small private dining room at a hotel across town that could accommodate 50 people. It wasn't glamorous, but it was available and within a reasonable budget. She could have her engagement party, just not the extravagant celebration she'd been planning. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked what about the other 100 guests who'd already been invited. I suggested she'd have to make some difficult choices about who was most important to her. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She asked if I would be attending this smaller gathering. I told her that depended on whether she thought my face would ruin the photos. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather. I'd spent the day at my apartment, catching up on reading and enjoying the unusual quiet. My phone had been mercifully silent since my sister's call the day before. At 7 o'clock, I opened a bottle of wine and stepped onto my balcony. My apartment building was only 6 blocks from the Metropolitan Club, and from my 15th floor vantage point, I had a clear view of the venue's rooftop terrace. The space that should have been glowing with celebration lights remained dark. The terrace that should have been filled with my sister's friends and family was empty except for the regular security staff making their evening rounds. I thought about the small hotel dining room across town where my sister was presumably trying to salvage some version of her dream party with 50 guests instead of 150. I wondered which family members and friends had made the cut, who had been deemed essential versus expendable. The wine tasted better than usual. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my sister's fiancé, thanking me for helping them find an alternative venue. He mentioned that despite the smaller scale, the evening had been beautiful and meaningful. He hoped that someday our family could find a way to move past this situation. His grace made me feel something I hadn't expected, a small twinge of regret. But then I remembered my sister's words about not wanting my face in her photos. I remembered Dad's assessment of my pathetic nature. I remembered years of being tolerated but never truly valued. The regret faded. I stayed on the balcony until well past midnight, watching the city lights twinkle below. The Metropolitan Club's terrace remained empty, a monument to consequences and the price of taking family for granted. Update 1. 3 weeks have passed since my sister's engagement party, and the fallout has been more extensive than I anticipated. The story spread quickly through our extended family network. Cousins, aunts, and uncles started taking sides, creating fractures in relationships that had seemed solid for decades. Some supported my decision, saying my sister and father had crossed a line with their cruel words. Others viewed my actions as disproportionate revenge that had damaged the family's reputation. My sister's fiancé postponed their wedding. He told mutual acquaintances that the stress of the engagement party disaster, combined with the ongoing family drama, had made them realize they needed to work through some issues before making such a major commitment. I felt a stab of guilt about that. Whatever problems existed between my sister and me, her relationship shouldn't have become collateral damage. Dad stopped speaking to me entirely. He'd apparently told other family members that I was dead to him, that no son of his would deliberately sabotage a family celebration out of spite. The dramatic language was typical of him, but hearing it secondhand still stung more than I'd expected. My business, however, was thriving. Word had gotten out in industry circles about what had happened, and surprisingly, it had enhanced rather than damaged my reputation. Other venue managers respected the power move, and I'd received several job offers from competitors who wanted someone with my combination of connections and ruthlessness. The success felt hollow, though. I'd been thinking a lot about what I'd really accomplished. My sister learned that actions have consequences, and my father learned that his words carried weight. But I'd also learned something about myself that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. I was capable of calculated cruelty that could rival theirs. Update 2. 6 months later, my sister called. It was the first time we'd spoken since the engagement party disaster. Her voice was different, quieter, less confident than I remembered. She told me that she and her fiancé had ended their relationship 2 weeks earlier. The stress of the canceled party had exposed deeper issues in their relationship, problems that might have remained hidden if everything had gone smoothly. She thanked me. The words came out hesitant, like she wasn't entirely sure she meant them. But she explained that the disaster had forced her to examine her priorities and her behavior. She'd realized that the person who could casually exclude her own brother from a major life event wasn't someone she particularly liked. She'd been in therapy for 3 months, working on what she called her entitlement issues. She'd come to understand that her treatment of me wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of taking people for granted. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask me to fix our relationship. She simply wanted me to know that the consequences of that night had led to some painful but necessary self-reflection. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. She told me that Dad was struggling more than he'd admit. His business had hit some rough patches, and without the family unity he'd always taken for granted, he seemed lost. He'd been asking about me indirectly, wondering how I was doing but too proud to reach out directly. Before hanging up, she mentioned that she'd kept the small engagement party venue. She went there sometimes for dinner alone, sitting at the table where she'd celebrated with the 50 people who'd really mattered. She'd discovered that intimate celebrations felt more meaningful than elaborate spectacles. Update 3. A year after the engagement party that never was, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Dad stood in my doorway looking older than I remembered. His usually perfect posture had developed a slight stoop, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd lost. He asked if we could talk. We went to the same restaurant where we'd had our tense lunch a year earlier. But this time, he didn't order before I arrived. He waited, asked what I wanted, and let me choose the wine. He started with an apology that sounded rehearsed but felt sincere. He acknowledged that his text message had been cruel and that he'd spent months trying to justify behavior he knew was wrong. He admitted that he'd always been harder on me because he saw potential he thought I was wasting, but realized his criticism had become a pattern of diminishment rather than motivation. I told him that I'd spent the year thinking about our family dynamics too. I'd come to understand that my revenge had been about more than just his text or my sister's exclusion. It had been about years of accumulated resentment finally finding an outlet. He nodded and said he deserved that resentment. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about his business troubles, how losing some major clients had forced him to reevaluate his priorities. He'd realized that professional success meant nothing if his family relationships were broken. I told him about my own success, the job offers, the recognition I'd received in my industry. But I also admitted that none of it felt particularly satisfying when I had no one to share it with. We didn't fix everything that day. A year of silence and decades of problematic dynamics couldn't be resolved over one lunch. But we started talking again, carefully at first, then with growing ease. He asked about my sister, whether I'd spoken to her. I told him about her call, her therapy, her broken engagement. He looked sad, but not surprised. He admitted that he'd probably contributed to her entitled attitude by always fixing her problems without teaching her accountability. Before we left, he asked if I'd consider having dinner with him and my sister the following week. Nothing formal or forced, just the three of us trying to figure out how to be a family again. I said yes. The dinner was awkward at first. We were all hyper-aware of being on our best behavior, too polite, too careful with our words. But gradually, as we shared stories about our year apart and our individual growth, the conversation became more natural. My sister had started a new job at a nonprofit, taking a significant pay cut from her previous finance position, but finding more meaning in her work. She seemed genuinely happier, less concerned with external validation and material status. Dad had scaled back his law practice, taking on fewer cases, but focusing on work he found more fulfilling. He'd started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, using his skills to help people who couldn't afford high-end representation. I told them about turning down a lucrative management position at a major hotel chain because it would have required relocating. I'd realized that staying near family, even complicated family, mattered more than career advancement. We didn't become a perfect family overnight. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that resurged during stressful conversations. But we'd all learned something valuable about the cost of taking each other for granted. My sister never had another engagement party. When she eventually met someone new and got married 2 years later, it was a small ceremony in my venue's intimate garden space. She asked me to walk her down the aisle since Dad's arthritis made it difficult for him to stand for long periods. In her wedding speech, she mentioned learning that the people who truly matter are the ones who stick around even when you don't deserve it, who give you opportunities to do better even after you've failed them. She was looking at me when she said it. The revenge I'd planned had been perfect in its execution and devastating in its impact. But the reconciliation that followed taught me something more valuable than the satisfaction of consequences. Sometimes the people who hurt us are capable of genuine change, and sometimes forgiveness serves our own growth more than continued anger. I kept the apartment with the balcony view of the Metropolitan Club. On quiet evenings, I still went out there with a glass of wine. But instead of thinking about the engagement party that never happened, I found myself planning future celebrations for the family I'd almost lost and somehow found again.